What's up, guys? We are back for another Star Wars Black Series review, taking a look today at a figure vehicle deluxe pack. We're taking a look at the Solo Movies ENFYS Nest with her swoop bike. So we've got her here in this big old box. Yeah, it's a big thing. It's, you know, standard kind of Black Series packaging. We've got the black motif. We've got the figure in the window on the front. She's number 5 in the vehicle line, and then the back has product shots and a write-up. Really sells this thing pretty well. They're pushing this pretty hard on this packaging. I think it looks pretty sweet, so let's pull her out and take a closer look. Alright guys, here it is out of the package. We have got our swoop bike here, and as you can see, it's honestly too big for my review space. It's kind of taken up a lot of space on this table because it is a far bigger toy than I had ever expected it was going to be for some reason. The scale just didn't dawn on me until I got it out of the box. And then we, of course, have our action figure here front and center, and we're going to take a look at ENFYS Nest first, and then we will take a look at the swoop bike. So let's get that thing out of the way, and we will look at what's going on with this figure. She is, for the most part, exactly what you expect. Pretty standard Black Series, but there are some hindrances, specifically around the head neck area, and I'm sure you understand why. We have got 2 different pieces of material between the head and the shoulders. So her head is basically sitting atop of the furry kind of mantle and then the cape here. So this is the new double ball peg system. So she does have a ball going into the head and a ball going into the neck, but she doesn't really get a great deal of motion. She can look down a little bit, and she can look up, but only slightly. Her head rotates, but you're going to have problems with that. There's just too much friction between these varying pieces of material here, from the head to the shoulders and then everything in between. Because like I said, these are just sandwiched in there. So you can kind of rotate her around a little bit. So just keep that in mind. You are potentially going to fray this furry piece as well, which is kind of a concern. I'm not sure if it's actually going to happen, but I could see some of that starting to rub off over time. The arms can go out. They can spin all the way around. You're obviously going to hit this stuff, but it's not in the way. It's a Black Series, so we don't have a bicep swivel. We do have an elbow swivel and a single joint there. It's pretty much 90 degrees. We've got hinge and rotating wrists. Her diaphragm has a joint, so she can go down, she can go up, she can bob side to side, and then she can rotate. But it's nothing at the waist, it's only that diaphragm. We have got legs that go out about that far. She can rotate at the ball joint at the thigh, but then we've also got a true thigh cut as well. We have got double jointed knees, which go all the way back, and then we have got rockers and hinges on those ankles, and those are pretty solid. There's a lot of motion there. So for the most part, she is, you know, standard Black Series. There's nothing crazy or missing here in terms of what she offers, and she does have that new double ball peg, which I am a huge fan of in this line. The only real downside is that there's just so much going on between the head and between the shoulders that it really just gets in the way, and her head is very, very restricted because of that. Where this figure on its own really shines for me is just the looks department. I think she looks pretty solid. I'm very happy with the figure in a general sense. I do have a few complaints though, more gripes than kind of technical problems, I suppose. And the big thing is going to be the cape and just all the soft goods and the fur goods all over this figure. So like I've already mentioned, this piece and the cape sit between the head and the shoulders. So that presents problems on its own from an articulation standpoint. They're actually one piece, well, they're 2 pieces that are sewn together. So the fur is sewn on to the cape, and then that sits between the body and the head. And for the most part, I think it looks okay. If anything, I think there is just way too much going on here. And whether it's true to the source material or not, I think it makes for an odd looking figure at times, because it's stuff that is, like I've already mentioned, going to come off. And when I was taking the head apart to kind of figure out if that had the new ball peg system or not, stuff was coming off. And as you kind of rotate this around, you might find little pieces fraying off here and there. So definitely keep that in mind. I think the cape hangs okay. It's certainly not perfect. And I do think that the fur complicates it because it's honestly very, very thick. It's, you know, 3 or 4 times as thick as the cape itself. So you do have a lot of soft goods there. I don't think it looks bad, and she looks okay on her swoop, which we'll see shortly, but I'm sure there might have been a different way to implement this. I mean, it's just something that kind of gets in the way of the figure, and it's really the first thing you see is this big bushy mess of fur that sits on her shoulders. So you can pop the head off and kind of rotate it around a little. That's how I would suggest doing it anyway. I wouldn't suggest rotating it while the head is down. There's just so much friction there that it's going to start pulling things apart. Now, besides that, I do think the rest of the figure is pretty solid. We do have, we've got this kind of soft plastic down here for her kind of skirt pieces, which is painted pretty nicely. This is all attached to the body. It's not free floating. We've got her chest plate here, which is also attached to the body. Nice paint job on there. The kind of little bone pieces on there. We have what I believe are, I think these were kind of knives that like kind of fanned out almost. They swing out of here and are kind of like a fan of blades almost. And she has both of these on her arms. Those are painted well. You can't do anything with them, but they're painted nicely. There's quite a few paint apps on them. They are obviously unique sculpts in the Black Series line. She's got even more what I believe are weapons down here on her shins and ankles. And in general, I think the figure looks pretty solid. Of course, the defining characteristic, at least for me, is the helmet. And I think Hasbro did a pretty solid job. You can see her hair coming out of the back there. There's quite a few paint apps on this thing. We've got, kind of cracks and crevices all inside there. We've got the visor on the front, the silver piping, kind of blue accents on the backside. And in general, I think she looks really, really good. You can take the cape off, obviously. It just comes off, and she looks kind of weird without it on. But I still think it's iffy on whether or not this could have been implemented better. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a toy engineer, so I can just tell you what I think about it. And I think it looks okay, but I definitely think it does kind of detract in multiple ways from the overall figure, just from usability and articulation's sake. And outside of the swoop, I'm not going to consider that an accessory. ENFYS Nest does have one accessory. She has her kind of vibro axe saw type weapon. I honestly don't remember too much about this. Obviously, it's featured in the movie quite well. It is probably the most disappointing aspect of this figure set, though, because there's no paint on it. It's just sculpted matte gray plastic. It should have, at the very least, been metallic, which would have been nice. I may throw a black wash on here to bring some of that sculpt out. I'm not going to go too crazy with it. She can hold it in either hand, and one thing I was going to wait to mention until now, just because it's kind of poignant when I'm talking about what she's doing with her weapons, is that this is yet again another figure that has a trigger finger, but she doesn't have a gun. And I say this a lot, it just bothers me. Maybe there's not a right hand in the Black Series that doesn't have a trigger finger on it. But it's just a little annoyance. But she can hold this just fine in either hand. She can hold it double-handed just fine as well. And then this does have a place to be stored on the swoop bike, but we will talk about that in just a minute when we get to the bike. All right, so here it is, the main event, I suppose, depending on what you want to get out of this set. And like I mentioned, this thing is a lot bigger than I actually expected it to be. Obviously, I've seen Solo, but I guess the size of this thing was really lost on me when I was watching the film. It's not something I really paid much attention to, but it is absolutely massive. It's bigger than the land speeder. It's certainly bigger than the original speeder bike that we got. This thing is about 21 inches from front to back. So, it's a lot bigger than I think most people expect it to be. It's certainly not your average speeder bike. It's about 10 to 11 inches tall. It does sit on a base, although the base doesn't really add a great deal of height to it because it's got a lot of stuff that kind of hangs down. It does have a few moving parts. You do have to assemble some of this. So the front piece here, these kind of spindly kind of trellises that hang here and hold onto the fins at the front. This is one piece, and you just peg it into this bigger back piece here, and then you have to put these kind of pistons on the handlebars here. They kind of move around. They're kind of flimsy, but they kind of mimic, a piston type action, which I think is kind of cool. It's a fun little detail that they've added. There is a removable part as well, which kind of shows the inner workings, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's kind of go through just the ins and outs of this thing. There's not a great deal to talk about. It's mostly something to look at. There's no real articulation or anything to speak of, but there are a few details that are definitely worth talking about. So to start, we'll just kind of go from the front to back. I mean, it's exactly what you've seen in the movie. I think they did a really good job of translating this from film to, well, not figure, but vehicle. We've got most of the body of the swoop bike is cast in kind of a tan plastic, and that might be where my real gripe comes in, is that a lot of it is unpainted. We've mostly just got kind of, the markings on the red fins, and then there is paint on the body, but I wish that it maybe had more of a wash in certain places. A lot of it is just cast plastic, which I understand. I get the nature of creating a vehicle and how much goes into this, but I always want more paint when I can get it. So most of the front here is pretty flimsy. There's not a whole lot to it. It's basically just holding the fins on to the bike. So I assume in universe this has some functionality, but I don't know. Then we've got the kind of midsection here, which shows, I guess, a lot of the maybe repulsor technology that's in here, because it's a repulsor lift style vehicle. You've got kind of some engine type cabling in there. We've got the footrests. And then, like I mentioned, there is a removable part, and you can kind of see the engine bay, I guess is what this is supposed to be. In the instructions, it shows that you can kind of hinge this up, but you can't. It's just 2 pegs that are in there. So you've got that as an option if you want. There is obviously some paint on this guy. We've got the red and the silver, and then there is some gray down here, and then we've got the silver kind of dry brushing to show wear and tear. And you can see, you know, this shows that this bike has maybe been around for a while. I'm assuming it's not new to ENFYS in any way. You know, maybe it's, spoiler alert, her mother's or something. So we've got paint removed there as well, but you can see a lot of the inner workings, and I do like that. There's obviously a lot of sculpt work that goes into that. And then we have got some more paint over here on the back. We do have a little bit of a wash here. There is some silver metallic paint here, which I find interesting that it's only in certain places. So that's kind of a thing. We do have you know, little bits and bobs that hang off. And one thing that I find really, really interesting on this is that we've seen in the movie that people hang off the back. It has footrests for figures, and you can actually fit the feet of like stormtroopers and clones and things like that in there. That's kind of what I was testing with. But it's really hard to figure out how to get people to stand on this. Mostly what I figure you do is you put 1 foot in and then they hang off the side, because they can't stand really well 1 foot in, 1 foot in here, like kind of standing with your foot in front of the other, and they can't stand across the fin either. So it's an interesting thing. I'm just not sure if it's practical or if it's actually meant to be used. I have no way to know. It doesn't say anything about it in the instructions either, so I was kind of hoping there might be something in there when I saw that, but there is not. And then on this side here, and then it's on the other side as well, we've got a spot to put the weapon for ENFYS. It just sort of sits in there. So you've got spots on either side here. And then we do have these little removable pieces here. I'm not sure what they are, but they're little removable bits and bobs that are on both sides here. You can kind of see that it's basically the same on both sides for the most part. You know, paint is going to differ from figure to figure, from vehicle to vehicle, so it's always not going to be 100%. So we've got like the little removable bits and bobs here as well. You can kind of see the engines on the back there. They are also unpainted, which I'm kind of disappointed. If anything, I was hoping they might have a wash in them to kind of show how worn they are and just how used they are. But, you know, what are you going to do? And then we do have the base down here, which kind of mimics like a little airflow kind of thing. We've seen this with other stuff. So like, you know, Ray's Speeder has this kind of thing. Different from the original speeder bike, for example. But let's take a look at how ENFYS looks on the speeder or on the SWOOP bike, because obviously everybody's going to display her that way, I would imagine. I mean, I'm going to. All right, so here she is kind of mounted on the SWOOP bike itself, and you can see that, you know, you're going to have to position her so that her fur and her cape, you know, maybe sit a certain way. You can have it so that she's sitting on it, or maybe have it push it back so it's kind of billowing backwards. One thing that I didn't mention that I was going to wait just to show you while she's on it is that one thing that I actually particularly like, it's a little feature, but it's something that always really annoys me with vehicles and stuff like this, is when a figure's foot cannot hit the kind of the footrest or the pedal. So what they did was they made these movable, so you can rotate this around. Although she can't get her foot even remotely close to that level, so it's always going to have to be up. I'm assuming this might be something related to how it actually works in universe, maybe. But I like that little touch. It's just a little thing, but it's always nice to make it look like that. At the very least, her foot is as close as possible to the footrest, and she's just not dangling off of it like a little kid or something. And then again, like I said, you can put her weapon into the holster, into the rest on the side. So, you know, I mean, in general, I think she looks pretty good on this thing. You can really get a sense for how big this is when you have a full 6-inch figure on it. I mean, you know, she's only taking up a few inches worth of this thing. There's just so much more plastic in this box that you never really expect until you get it out. Or maybe you do. I just didn't really realize how big this thing was going to be until I really got it in my hand. It's a lot larger than I had ever anticipated, but I think they did a pretty good job of translating all of this into plastic. And like I mentioned, here is just a quick comparison for size sake of just how big this thing is compared to the original speeder bike, which is still among my favorite pieces in the Black Series. They really did a great job on that. But this thing is absolutely massive. I mean, the speeder bike on its own is nowhere near as large, and you can just get an idea for the size this thing packs from height, overall girth, the fact that it doesn't necessarily even need to sit on that stand to still be very large and imposing. Yeah, it's just a big piece. There's a lot to it, and it's very, very much a humongous chunk of plastic that Hasbro has pumped out here. So overall, at the end of the day, I am pretty happy with this thing. It definitely does have some things that I would like to have been improved. You know, I always hope for more paint on stuff, and I do think that the SWOOP itself kind of suffers from not having enough paint on the chassis and, you know, having any kind of metallic sheen to some of the undercarriage or some of the inner working parts. But it looks nice, and it's definitely a big piece of plastic. It's definitely a lot more of your money's worth than some of the other vehicles we've gotten so far, especially if you can get it for less than retail. The figure on its own looks pretty solid. I'm very happy with the overall look and feel of her. I do think that the collar piece and the cape does limit and add some frustration factor to the figure in general, but overall she very much does look the part. And then again, my big gripe for the figure is that that weapon is just not painted, and that's annoying. It should have been metallic at the very least, but it is a fun figure and it's a fun set piece. Now I just have to figure out what in the world I'm gonna do with it. So that's gonna do it for this look at the Star Wars Black Series ENFYS Nest and SWOOP bike from Hasbro. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and until next time.